mic'd.
Yeah, I think we are ready to go. Yeah, we're all ready to go. Yeah.
Then you guys go start.
And thanks to Lisa for organizing today with everyone else.
Yes, it's a great job, Lisa. It is. All right, I think we saved the best for the last. The topic we're going to be talking about is a multi-cloud and multi-cluster. Well, actually, why don't I let you guys introduce yourself very quickly. Eric, we heard from you this morning.
Sure.
Could you just...
I'm Eric Hahn. I work on product management at Portworx. And actually, I worked with Bassam 17 years ago. So.
Hi, I'm Bassam. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Upbound. And I'm also a maintainer on the project called Rook and a project called Crossplane.
And as Lisa said, I'm Venkat Kohli. I'm a product manager at VMware, working on cloud-native storage. So let's start with the multi-cluster. So why multi-cluster? We had that question this morning. Eric, you had some thoughts. For the folks who missed it, can you just talk about what is the reason for someone to consider multi-cluster?
Well, I think Joe.
Multi-cloud, sorry.
Multi-cloud, okay.
Yeah, multi-cloud.
So multi-cloud for us is really that there are customers who every Global 1000 is going to run multi-cloud, right? So they don't want to have a single source when it comes to their public cloud, and also that they're delivering different services where there's restrictions. And so there's oftentimes a business imperative as well as a compliance requirement for them. And so it's also a good business practice, right? So I think it's for all those reasons, and I'm sure more that Bassam will add.
I mean, sometimes there are non-obvious ones. Sometimes the Global 2000 are, a lot of ways that they grow is they acquire companies. And it's really hard to acquire companies that are on exactly the same cloud. So they become multi-cloud.
Yeah.
Or, like we said, compliance reasons, or things like, they're trying to arbitrage cost, or they're trying to reduce their lock-in. There are plenty of reasons why people decide to do that. But the other aspect is that it's, for certain cloud environments like AWS, if you run multi-region, you might as well be multi-cloud. I mean, there's very distinct, and you have to do a lot of infrastructure across them. And so there are really a handful of reasons that people kind of do this. What we hear consistently is that is definitely the direction that the Global 1000, 2000 are actually heading.
Yeah, so sometimes it's not a choice. It's,
it's a forced decision.
It's forced, yeah, that the decision is made for them. Right. So how does cost play a role into this? I mean, does it benefit when you go multi-cloud, or is it sometimes more expensive to go to multi-cloud?
I'll go first, and you want to go first?
Go ahead.
Years ago, I remember I met a company that was trying to do arbitrage in multi-cloud, and I don't think the world's quite there yet, even 4 years ago. So there were a bunch of finance people. They wanted to do arbitrage going across and do a spot market. I don't think that's going to happen. I do think that, so to your cost question, I do think that there are customers who understand the cost advantages, but operational complexity, lift and shift, is actually non-zero cost, right? So they have to be thoughtful, design it, or in some cases inherit it, and at that point it's sunk cost. So I think customers are doing it mostly from the perspective of it's a cost of business, and it's not a way to point shave, at least from the ones that I've seen. So I don't see that arbitrage quite yet. But maybe that will change.
I mean, you can probably argue both sides of this.
Yeah.
You hear large cloud providers tell you that if you do more business with them, you get more buying power.
Right.
And so you get more volume discounts, and you can negotiate a better deal. So don't spread your load across clouds. Keep it all in one place, and we'll give you more discounts. Right? And that is true. You can actually get more buying power if you stay with one cloud provider. But it's really hard to actually compare that to the alternative, which is if you actually were able to arbitrage cost or have more of a negotiating position, if you had more options, which one, if cost is the issue, which one's a larger delta?
Right.
And I think it's hard to tell at this point, but my bet is if you have more choice and you're able to change vendors, or you're able to actually have more choice in the kind of stack that you have, the power lies with the consumer at this point.
So it's very situation dependent. So the other aspect of our talk is a multi-cluster. So how does multi-cluster map to multi-cloud? How do one go plan about it?
I'll go first. I think typically when people say multi-cluster, they're talking about multiple Kubernetes clusters.
Yeah.
That's the common connotation that I see. And so obviously you can run multiple clusters in one environment, in one cloud, and on-premise. It's just an array of clusters, right? Where I think people use multi-cloud is when you're actually using multiple cloud providers is the common terminology. So that to me is the difference between both.
Yeah, I agree with what Bassam said, right? I think there are customers who will sometimes use different schedulers or different flavors of Kubernetes. So that happens in multi-cluster, and it's because certain application teams want that variant, or that business unit gets to decide. So sometimes there is a business choice, and they say the application goes with the platform choice, and so we've seen that with multi-clusters. And then I think Bassam explained multi-cloud very well. So yeah.
So obviously this is CNS, cloud native storage. So what are the storage considerations when we're looking at multi-cloud, like architecturally or when you think planning for storage? What does one need to consider?
Do you want to go first, or?
Well, Ron, Robin. I think for us that's an important part of what we're trying to do, and that is to have a consistent experience and operational guideline. And so the point is that customers want to be able to train up and learn how to use a common set and run with best of class in any environment. So it kind of has to work very well in public cloud and on-prem. So I think for us, storage is what we're trying to solve for that use case of multi-cloud, even if it's just saying I want a better experience in public cloud and someday I'll go on-prem or vice versa. So I still think that for us, a lot of our business starts in cloud and we'll move on-prem, and sometimes the other flow happens. So it has to be the same, and the way we're built, we always are delivering storage. So.
I mean, I probably have a slightly different view on this. I'd say that, when possible, use common abstractions that isolate you from the actual environment and infrastructure you're running on. So, for example, Kubernetes has this great persistent volume claim abstraction, which puts you, a bit away from the actual storage that's, supplying it. So, if you're in Amazon, you're using, their storage technology, or if you're in Google, you're using theirs. And you're writing your app to an abstraction that helps you, isolate yourself from the storage system. In general, that falls apart in many ways, but the direction is good. If you could actually create an abstraction that enables you to use the best of breed or the different technologies that are available out there without having to retool and re-engineer every time you actually make a decision to run somewhere else, I think that's actually the best situation to be in.
Yeah. And Eric, so you brought up an interesting point when we talk about multi-clouds, right? For going from on-prem to a public cloud. So when you're considering the hybrid situation, hybrid being on-prem and public cloud combined, or being considered for both. So do you plan it differently versus keeping it between public clouds?
So you do plan it differently in the sense that your public cloud experience is usually not available on-prem. I understand there's variance with things like OpenShift, but most of the time people in public cloud are running an EKS, AKS, or a GKE, and on-prem they don't necessarily have that, and Anthos will solve some of it. So there is a choice that they have to understand of how to control and manage the masters. But then they always want to have afterwards the same playbook. So I think in the beginning it's very different, and when you're on-prem you're locked into that infrastructure that your environment has. So some things that we see commonly on-prem that clouds can do a little differently is very few have regional capabilities of storage like Google does. Mm-hmm. So Google can do regional PD, most cannot. And so Amazon doesn't have it on-prem, no one really has it. And so that's the kinds of problems that they start to try to solve. So there is a difference, but I think the inspiration is the same.
Yeah, I mean, my answer is the same as the last question, which is if you can figure out how to make some of these decisions be runtime decisions and not design time decisions. So if you were moving environments, you don't have to re-engineer and re-architect the entire thing and spend engineering effort. That's the best place to be. Yeah. So that means make sure your stack is, you pick technologies that are available in different environments or have wire protocols that are available in different environments, that you are not baking in, design time decisions that makes you lose the optionality and forces you in one path. I think those would be good practices if your goal is to run on multiple environments or run hybrid, or you should figure out how to arrive at a more portable approach.
So when you're thinking about that, so how does the data gravity play into it? Right? I mean, is it
very good question? I'll start with that one. So it's real. If you've put all your data in place and then egress cost is expensive, then you have a data gravity problem.
Yeah.
But it's also it's an engineered problem. It's price engineering, right? And the reason it's this way is because they want your data to stay in one place. They want you to essentially be, within the cloud provider that you're currently using, right? And so the only way that changes is that if we change the dynamics and customers are asking for more portability, then the pricing changes and then data becomes more mobile. So at this point, it is basically a cost discussion. You can run the spreadsheet, you can figure out whether you should move your data or not, or you can do all that stuff.
Yeah.
I think the dynamics of pricing change over time.
Anything to add, Eric?
Yeah, data gravity is real, and so we want to move data efficiently. There's ways to do it with direct connect, but you still do have egress costs in certain cases. So I think customers are designing for it, and the way they think about it is to have that optionality.
So I think it's been being established that Kubernetes is the standard abstraction layer for multiple clouds, right? Most people are considering that Kubernetes is one that to kind of abstract away these multi clouds. Do you see that all stateful applications will be deployed in Kubernetes? There is a Kubernetes ready for all stateful applications. We touched base on that this morning. What's your take on it?
It was interesting to hear the folks talking about databases.
Yeah.
That was a really good discussion. I mean, honestly, my perspective on this is that Kubernetes is great. It is a really amazing platform to run container workloads. Should all workloads be cast into container workloads? I don't think so. If you're using RDS, you should continue to use RDS. There's no need to try to shift it to something else. If you're using RDS, if your goal is to get portable, then take a dependency on MySQL wire protocols, which makes you a bit more portable than if you were, say, using Dynamo. But fully managed services are really good. Somebody else will give you an SLA. If you're running in public cloud, why spend time running infrastructure? If you're running on-premise, you don't have that choice. And you should run it on Kubernetes. Yeah. That's better than doing anything else. Yeah. But if you're in public cloud, I don't know why you would spend any time running databases or message queues or any of the infrastructure. And I don't know why you would spend any time trying to figure out how to pin containers and do all that. And I speak from a perspective of someone that's worked on a Rook operator, so I totally understand the operator model. But we would tell people use it on premise. I don't know why you would use it.
So your advice is just don't blindly just go with the Kubernetes platform and just
Think of Kubernetes as a compute platform for your containers, not necessarily the substrate for everything.
Yeah.
So here I would disagree in the sense that I think when we started, we thought that most of our customers would be on-prem, and the large majority are started on-prem. But public cloud running on EBS is becoming significant for us. Some of it is because some of the large banks don't want to be tied to RDS. Sometimes they want a different variant. So I understand where you're coming from, and I respect it. I would say that there are customers who they're building a real-time stack, and there's not a hosted variant, or they're in a region and it's not available. And so they need to design it in a way that makes it, if it's available in that region, but it's not available in another region, they want to have that common playbook. So there is cases, and our customers are always running something stateful. Now, the extrapolation of your question could be, is everything going serverless? Which I don't know. Yeah. I don't particularly think so, right? It's a very different pattern. But I do see that customers are still wanting to give their application teams a language of choice or database of choice. And so that goes broader than some of the hosted services, which do have value, but they're trying to customers are trying to build real-time systems. and they need to be able to pick the best of breed apps at that point. So I think everything will run. The ones that I'm most excited about, unrelated to databases, are things like batch processing, preemptible workloads, because now you can start to fold clusters on top of clusters. And I think that's where things will go.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's a slightly different perspective on it. So before we open up the questions for the audience, one last question that I want to ask is that, so, we had a session on the security, right? So how does the multi-tenancy or security considerations take into place when you're looking at the multi-cloud? Eric, you want to start?
Yeah, I'll say that I don't think the world is ready for Coke and Pepsi to run on the same set of servers. So multi-tenancy from the sake of two fighting entities would not work, or I wouldn't recommend it. But from the sake of I have a PaaS or infrastructure that is shared amongst different teams, and I want to give a zero trust approach because that's my business policy, and I am going to run multiple tenants, I do think they can. I do think they'll run in different namespaces. And I do think sometimes they'll run in their own clusters. Mm-hmm. I think the QoS level is not quite there yet. I don't think people understand how to do all the workloads with different bursting priorities. But from a security perspective, if you are trusting and you're just different groups, that's okay. If you're warring groups, I wouldn't put it on the same cluster today.
Yeah, just one thought on that is that if clusters are hard to set up or are treated like pets, then you're right, multi-tenancy becomes harder to do, and we're not ready for a fully multi-tenant solution per cluster. But if clusters become like nodes are today, and they become cattle, and you're able to create clusters on the fly and as needed, and the cost equation works out, you can, if you want, create a cluster per tenant as a model, and that model is secure. So the problem shifts to managing clusters and maybe a control plane that helps you, create and schedule across clusters. But that is a fairly well understood security model for multi-tenancy.
Yeah, great. Anything that you guys want to know or ask the panel? Multi-cloud?
Luis has a question?
Yeah, so let me just ask you, so how many of you are going to be in a situation where you're going to be deploying multi-cloud in the near future? Right, 3 or 4 hands. How many of them you think will be sticking to just one cloud, either just on-prem or even a public cloud? How many you think will be completely homogeneous? Well, pretty even number, not surprising. Luis? Yeah, go ahead. Well, why don't you just, we can hear you, Luis. Go ahead.
To create managed Kubernetes clusters today. It's an API call away. You can light up a cluster in most public clouds. I think the problem shifts to, like you said, what's the control plane or the orchestration layer for clusters, and how do you schedule work across clusters? All those things become the problem, right? Projects like Federation have attempted to do something like this. We're doing something like this with Crossplane, but it is still early days. I think KubeVirt might be a solution for hosting this, but you don't have to use KubeVirt to light up a Kubernetes cluster somewhere. You could use your cloud provider or your platform vendor of choice.
So I think KubeVirt's really cool, right? I think I said it to Aaron today too, in the sense that I feel like most of us are talking about new workloads. KubeVirt could enable legacy workloads. So, and back to your question about what won't run in Kubernetes, for licensing a reason, I don't know, Oracle will run in Kubernetes, but maybe someday it will.
Yeah.
Outside of Oracle Cloud, right? And I don't know if that would also solve those kinds of brownfield applications. Maybe KubeVirt can help us there. So I think that would be really cool if KubeVirt came on. I think it'll take some time, but I think it's one of the coolest things out there, personally.
I think that's all the time we have. Thank the panelists, Eric and Bassam.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.